So for the sake of the Smithsonian, Phil, in the world of
Mhm.
podcast firsts, this is a momentous
Mhm.
one. This is a huge one. We've had Thomas Rongan on. We've had various luminaries from the Austin FC Media Corps on, but a first mailbag episode. This is, I don't know how to put it other than that this could change everything. This is where a podcast really succeeds or fails.
Yeah, we are beginning to get into a next level of podcasting. We're also recording on a Monday, which is what Jeremiah and Landon usually do for Moon Tower.
I mean,
So
that's a real
it's
emergency.
additional.
That's it, like
Yeah.
we're adopting another podcast schedule. That's the real emergency. The article version of the mailbag had its peaks and valleys. You know, the Dominican Republic
Mhm.
disaster references, the cool guy at party experiences that you had to relate. So many things covered, but you haven't covered all of the ground that there is to be covered, Phil. And we're getting into sartorial choices. So, what do we
Mhm.
have to kick things off?
Yeah, I just want to say that first of all, there were a lot of really great questions, which is awesome. And I thank everybody who did that. And of course, that provides a quasi emergency like we haven't had so far. We've had actual emergencies. We've chosen to create our own timeline around those, but this one constitutes enough of an emergency to where we are here on a Monday. And the first question, and again, this is one that I don't know that we're going to be able to answer right now, but it's one that definitely is going to require some research, some digging, some difficult questions that we're going to have to ask people. It deals with socks. Jill Douglas was nice enough to ask. She didn't ask, first of all, she just said socks, exclamation point, and then asked,
Yeah.
do the guys make their own holes in the socks or does someone do it for them? Is there a special tool? This begs the question as to why this is even necessary. Can't we make socks big enough for our players' calves? Also, does Danny Pereira not wear shin guards? Like, this is
So
great stuff, but
this is deeply incisive stuff. I honestly I have some off the record sourcing for this or anonymized sourcing for some of this.
okay.
I have heard reliable tell that Danny Pereira does indeed hate shin guards and uses the absolute league allowed bare minimum that he has to have in those socks
Mhm.
just to get on the field. I don't know if he's superhuman, if his shins are made of steel, or if the younger guys are just built that way. But on the topic of calves, those tall socks, they're rather restrictive, and these guys like the compression effect is nice enough, but sometimes it's a bit too restrictive, and that's why they cut those holes in their socks. Is there a special tool for it? I don't know that there's a special tool for it other than unbridled hatred for standardized dressing procedures. But look, we could probably do a whole hour and a half on why Ricky Puig tucks his jersey in exactly the way that makes him look like a floppy haired jerk in
And
a
we
way
may at
that
some point.
yeah, in a way that other players who tuck their jersey in doesn't look quite that silly. But yeah, I didn't expect to actually have answers for something this far out of the West Side stands to say that instead of left field, a baseball metaphor, which would be wholly inappropriate on a soccer podcast.
Mhm. Unless you're in NYCFC.
Yankee Stadium FC, they have a name, okay?
So, Jill, I guess to answer your question, and we'll do more of a deep dive in the weeks to come as we get the opportunities to in various press conferences. But I think that the word you're looking for to explain, to answer all of the questions that you've asked here is freedom.
Emergency podcast. They did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
A hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the podcast where we deal with all the Austin FC emergencies, including the emergencies of lots of questions, too many to fit into one 2,000-word article. So we are here answering some questions on a Monday afternoon in which I have invested or perhaps squandered time watching Ghana through their World Cup qualifiers. This one, I got to see a lot of offensive subs. I got to see a lot of goals, but I did not see one Usman Bukari getting subbed in. Basically, every other conceivable offensive sub that could have been put into that match was put in. And as a result of those offensive subs not being Bukari, I am offended. Moisés Chiullán, you're with me. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I am not as frustrated as you and various others seem to be that Osman didn't get subbed in. because I think it's very courteous of the Black Stars to rest him for Austin, for this audience that deserves to see him take his next turn on the field for his new club team. They're just wanting him to have a proper big stage debut with a big hard mentality club. That's the way that I see this. Is it's just courtesy. That's all it is.
I wanted to sneak peek though. I wanted to preview. I wanted
Yeah,
to get
I
a
get
little
that.
bit of yeah. Yeah.
Especially if people who don't like I do not watch a ton of AFCON soccer, but it is always real good. Like they're the CONCACAF
Mhm.
sickos. And for me, like watching African nations play against each other, watching African clubs play against each other, it is a different vibe, a different energy in a way that I feel is different than CONCACAF, is different than some of the heights of Europe, because these guys go really all out and their supporters go really all out. It is a really serious thing. It would have been nice to see him play against Mali or Central African Republic, but I guess we didn't really get a say in the matter.
No,
We
we did
voiced
not.
we voiced our say. Was it listened to? No, no. But I have a feeling we will be seeing plenty of him relatively soon.
Yeah, I'm eager to do that, obviously. Yeah, and with AFCON, it's a special kind of chaos. Obviously, CONCACAF, we are very finely attuned to that, having seen it, having lived in it, having witnessed it over the years. Yeah, I don't see as many African matches as I would like, but Michael Lahoud, talked to him about that before, of course, Sierra Leone, kind of big expertise there. He talks about just when he's played with that team, just the special brand of chaos that exists in that continent and that federation like none other. So yeah,
Yeah.
but like you said, Bukari should be coming, we hope soon. And again, him and now Miguel Desler, possibilities of seeing them as early as July 20th. I do want to petition the weather gods. They can't technically play July 17th against Dallas, which could be the Copa Tejas clinching match. Would it be so awful if that game got rained out and got
What a shame. That, you know what? We didn't have that in the mailbag, but it got thrown into the mailbag right out of your mind, Phil. And I love where your head's at,
Yeah.
because I love nothing more than not having to watch it midweek, right? Yeah, not having to watch midweek soccer in Frisco. Oh boy,
Mhm.
that feels good. Throw that in after both Dallas and Austin are out of League's Cup on a weekend.
Mhm.
Just throw it in. Just throw it in on a
Yep.
weekend as a makeup game, and with Bukari and Dessler fully rested, and I think we're in good shape.
Yep. Who says no? Dallas.
Dallas, probably. Dan Hunt said no to having a head coach for now. There could be crazier fireworks if there's suddenly a new coach in time for a big rivalry match. Who it'll be, how long they'll last, who knows?
Celebrate the new coach with a drone show.
Yeah, there you go. That's one of the things that they're best at, is drone shows and selling them
All
Toyota.
right, we have 10 million questions to get to. Wait, not quite that many, but let's see. Before we start that, Moises, any kind of rules or guardrails you want or
Well,
anything to talk
how about
about?
here's the thing: is you've poured over these, you've reordered these. There, I feel like there is method to the madness of what we've
Mm,
got. So, how about I read them off to you and throw it to you, because I mean, you did a whole article on this in mailbag mode,
mhm.
and as I have something to contribute or respond to, frankly, I'm more interested than anything in hearing your responses to these.
Okay.
All right, so to kick things off,
I do want
okay.
you to chime in too, of course, as
No,
you provided valuable sock insights. So,
look, I got a few things socked away. See, I'm not a
oh,
dad, but
oh,
I'm not a dad, but Father's Day is soon.
that was
And
good. That was good.
I've got the dad jokes ready. So to kick things off, Dylan Biles asks, we know that Ring took the PK with Seba out, but who are some of the other options for PKs and how would you rank them? Oh, man,
That's
Phil, we don't have time for a whole draft, but you've got to have an order of preference in mind.
Yeah, I would say certainly a lot of the offense players. Ring hit his really well, so not a traditional offensive player, but I think he's got to be in the mix. If you have a selection of five, I would definitely say Rubio as the primary striker. I would say whoever is playing wing, right? So theoretically,
Who knows?
obviously
John
you've got
Gallagher. What reality are we going into? Who knows?
right, you've got Obrion, you've got maybe Finley after he comes back from injury. Again, the specter of Owen Wolf taking a PK and feeling maybe certain elements of the fan base as he's doing that, I think is an interesting question. Fifth and final, maybe that is Owen Wolf's spot. And then I think Pereira,
Yeah.
I think in terms of just his development, helping him grow, plus his ability to hit a ball, I think that he would be a good choice. I do want to see Stuver take one at some point, but I don't know.
At some point, Stuver taking a PK would be glorious. You mentioned Rubio. I think the mouth at the front getting into the heads of every player on other teams, as we've seen, he's very
Mhm.
effective at. There's only so much that we can intuit from body language and everything, but Rubio having the reputation that he does of being like the backline defender with a mouth who just happens to play striker,
Mhm.
I think that in particular would be real special to see. Nothing against Giassi Zardes, who I think
Mhm.
Giassi would probably be totally fine taking PKs, but taking
Mhm.
PKs, I feel like tactically Rubio's better for it. Pereira hungry for it. Owen, as much as people want to assume things rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to tell you either way about the nepotism word between him and his dad. He the way he plays his son wherever he needs him, not necessarily where he wants to play or where he necessarily looks good or best in a given game. I don't know that he is going to enact the locker room reaction that he will get from going, when Seb is not taking them, Owen's going to take them. On top of the fact that he's got that weird Berhalterian streak of, oh, they've got to earn it. Oh, they've got to earn it. The puppy has to do the agility training course perfectly 78 times before they get to do one thing that they like. That kind of aspect of Wolf's coaching, which we talked about and bugs me, is one of the reasons that I would honestly be a bit surprised to see Owen show up um, toward the top of that list before some of these other guys we mentioned.
Mhm. But I could see him like fourth, maybe, or something like
Yeah,
that. I
fourth.
think Rubio
I could
takes
see
it
him there.
first, and then
Yeah.
yeah, so Rubio would take it first, and then Rubio would share his feelings about making the PK with the goalkeepers
Uh huh.
and the other players
Yep.
and the fans and basically everybody involved. Yeah.
But
Okay, good.
yeah, I think Ring kind of has the default when Seba's not on the field spot.
Hmm.
But yeah, then the question of hierarchy comes into play when Seba is on the field. And does
Hmm.
that change things? Does like Rubio become a preferred choice over Driussi in that case? Or is Wolf gonna just keep letting the captain's armband determine who's taking him? And
Hmm.
it could be as uncomplicated as that, as complicated as we would love to imagine so many of these things to be.
Hmm. And again, this might just figure in terms of kind of thinking about pecking order and all that, should they have to do it in the playoffs, unless, of course, if MLS all of a sudden adopts next pro rules and there are PK shootouts at the end of tie games, which I wholeheartedly endorse. I think that
I,
would be fun.
I think it's one of the best things that Next Pro has given us, along with the off-field treatment rule. Seeing players having to take PKs more regularly and having goalkeepers having to defend against PKs more regularly, I think is good. It's better than watching a boring additional half hour of soccer as the only
Hmm.
thing that we see from a draw, and only in that case in cup and playoff competitions.
Hmm. For sure. Yeah.
So
Also the font. We also like the font.
the font, yeah, we got to bring that font over. The new Pride jerseys are abominable, so the Next Pro font could not possibly be a downgrade. Let's see. Up next, Ezra Sarens
Okay.
asks, we have a lot of wolf out discourse centering around the squad needs improvement versus tactics slash coaching need improvement, or both. Are there any quantitative metrics that attempt to isolate player skill versus coach's contribution? I figure these things are exceedingly difficult to disentangle, especially for players who've been with Austin FC for a long time, but wasn't sure if there are any secrets out there. Phil, what are the secrets? What's the magic of the metrics that we are missing?
I think you're right in saying that these are entangled and they are exceedingly difficult to disentangle. But I do think you need to, again, think about, for example, if you perceive a player to be played out of position, right? And then just trying to game by game, maybe weed those out. Maybe, for instance, with the RSL game, if you're trying to assess John Kolmanich, you would maybe try to take those stats out of the mix since he was playing kind of a weird hybrid wing back wing role that he should probably never do again. If you're looking at Alex Ring's numbers, you would want to maybe take out the games in 2023 where he was playing center back, although he I don't think did a terrible job playing center backs, but in terms of asking what a defensive midfielder does versus what a center back does, they're slightly different things, right? I use FBref a lot, and that just gives what they've done in the last 365 days compared to other players in the next 14 competitions as a baseline. But you can do things by season and by league specifically. So what that will do is that will give you raw numbers, and then that will give you numbers, percentiles compared to players in the rest of the league. And that's very useful to find out and figure out not just only how players are performing, how they're doing stats wise, but where they are relative to the competition. So I do think that there's a little bit of work that you can do there that will in part get at what players are able to do. But yeah, I think you're right in that it's hard to separate those from, say, what a coach is allowing a player to do and what a coach is allowing in that game, right? So if you look at Gallagher's numbers, for example, in 2023 compared to 24, they're going to be a lot more offensively minded. I can tell you without looking at those charts right now, but now I want to look at those charts and I want to compare them and see. But again, because Gallagher was playing much more forward in 23, that was part of the plan. That was part of what Wolf was trying to do to make the team more offensive, more attacking minded at the defense's detriment, versus in 24, he's been instructed to play further back, stay more home. You might see that change a little bit again once obviously you have Desler in. The idea would be maybe Baron Desler starts, and then as you're chasing a game late, perhaps you put Gallagher in at a fullback position to try to have kind of extra attacking prowess for your defense. But again, I don't know if that's necessarily something that Wolf would do, but it provides interesting thoughts, right? So again, that ability to adapt and put your players in the best place. But yeah, there's no real easy answer for this just because, again, we do have a lot more data than we've had, but players playing as they would free and unfettered on a pickup field as compared to players who are actually playing in a stadium for a professional team, for a coach who is giving instructions. Some different things are happening there.
Phil, let me just say, to take this completely seriously, what we need is a new stat. We need a new stat. We need XC. We need a meta metric that properly tracks the effectiveness of a coach, that whoever invents the actual calculus or trigonometry based formula for this is going to be the new king of all stats. So watch out, Chase Hoffman. In all seriousness, one of the things that I've noticed about the team is that you've got a player like John Gallagher who was playing on the wing and now he's a fullback. And if you want to try to compare Owen Wolf's numbers, okay, Owen Wolf's numbers in what game? Because in different games he's playing defensive midfield, in another game he's playing attacking midfield, in another game he's playing fullback, in another game he's playing wing, a third of another game he's playing as a second striker. All of a sudden the moving around of players is not as much of an issue with other guys on the roster, but it makes it difficult to figure out an objective measure for this kind of stuff when you do have that kind of positional play flexibility thing happening, where all of a sudden you see Gyasi Zardes playing striker, putting in a heavy defensive shift all of a sudden, and that moves things around. I don't know. Metrics are weird for me. I've said it before. I'll say it again.
Yep. Two things on that. So first of all, yeah, with Wolf, that's a really good example. There's actually two charts for Wolf. One is an attacking midfield wingers chart, and the other is midfield. And it's the same stats, but the comparisons are for those positions. So yeah, that's the thing though. He's accumulating some of those stats in a more advanced position, and he's accumulating some of those playing more back. It doesn't have him yet as a fullback.
Yeah.
So, because he's played some limited minutes there, but that will give you a sense of what he does and where he leans more towards. But if you just look at the base chart, even, it doesn't really matter necessarily. It does in terms of comparing to like players, but you can get a sense of his game by looking at either of the charts as you toggle between the two of those. And also with XC, I believe that you would probably need to have the person doing stats look at the number of times that a coach is yelling instructions to players and for how long and how loud the stadium is at the time, to
Yeah,
see
we're
like how much
like
of those instructions are actually getting through.
Yeah, things are going to need to be tracked that way. But yeah, like with Owen, the thing is he has the separate charts, but then it's what kind of sample size are we getting for each of those charts? How many games is he playing in this particular kind of a role? And like you said, we don't even have that for fullback. And we keep talking about charts and charts, and my mind immediately goes to astrological stuff where we're looking at what constellations are in play and how that might affect Wolf's mood and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a question to be answered for the next mailbag, almost a contest even of figure out how to define XC. Give us the proper argument for how you properly measure that new metastat.
I just want to say also,
yeah,
Lone Wolf is a Capricorn, and I'm wondering if you do something like, do you position it like in FIFA, where if you have water signs, do you need water signs next to each other for
Phil,
compatibility?
the astrology diehards are going to be filling the mailbag because we need to know what time he was born so that we could do his proper birth chart and where. And there's a lot of information that we need to gather so that we can properly look at what the movement of the cosmos is doing in terms of the future of the team.
But for the normal people, I would say that me just knowing that he's a Capricorn and itself is pretty
all
important.
right, Phil. Okay. Don't get the astrological folks up in a huff. Up next, Eric Kaufman asks, based on two recent signings, especially the price tag for Bukari, what do you think is ownership's willingness to spend up to keep Austin FC in the top tier of the league in terms of investing in established players? How well or not does that budget position Roto and the team for sustained success?
And then there's a couple of questions that are tied into this as well. I mean, we just got a big bag of Bukari curiosity, so maybe we should get those.
Yeah, we have Lee Nichols asked, didn't Chicago make a bigger offer for Bukari than Austin? How did we get him? And then Maury Domingo said, do you think Bukari is the maybe one other that Roto referenced a few months ago as additions during the upcoming transfer window?
Yeah, okay, let's get these last two first because I think these are the easiest ones. Chicago making a bigger offer. Yeah, I heard that it was 10 million versus the 7 point whatnot million that they offered Red Star Belgrade. And I would say just looking at the teams and the projects and what is the more kind of hopeful place to be. And also just looking at Chicago winters and whatnot, I just think that Austin is probably more appealing. So I think that's probably what factors in there. Yeah, again, it's you just because you offer more money doesn't mean that's not necessarily your ability to win, right? This isn't an auction. This is here's an offer, here's places where I could play. I think Chicago as a city is outstanding, but I think playing for the Fire right now, given where they're at versus Austin and where it's at, I think I don't really think it's much of a contest. Chicago's an interesting project, but Austin seems like it's more position for immediate success, and immediate being 1 to 2 years as compared to whatever it's going to take to rebuild the Fire.
What kind of a boost does he individually dropping into this team or that team make? And it feels like he has a bigger net immediate benefit to Austin than Chicago. And Roto said it in pushing back on some question or another about players and them coming in and going out and their family situation, and are they being brought into an environment where they're going to thrive because their wife is happy, their kids are happy, that kind of thing. Borrell looks at that in terms of making his player selections, and from the way that he talks about it, he's made it very clear that is also part of how they make the pitch. So to your point, I think a big piece of it was, okay, look, you want to come to MLS? Here are the various pros and cons. And I feel like the value proposition offered by Chicago was, here's a giant bag of money. Also, it's Chicago. Chicago's great. Have fun, kid. And I don't think it is performative that these players talk about their sporting director in terms of making the deal, as Miguel Desler did. Rodolfo Borrell is a deal maker. This is a guy that if this guy were coming to me to try to hire me as a soccer player, one, I would question why he's doing that because I haven't played center back in about 20 years. But I like
why does it have to be center back?
Look, man, that's just where my knees are at these days. You don't want me sprinting all over the You saw what happened with me playing at the 10 last December.
It's not a winger, not a 10.
Okay. I'm not a winger. I'm not a 10. Just put me at center back, and I will take out my fellow members of the media corps. If Rodolfo Borrell is coming to make a deal, he has the intent to make that deal. And I get the feeling that there is a certain vibe in other front offices across the league, not just because of the way that they presented themselves on draft day. Austin had everything all decked out and everybody looked very professional and put together, and other people looked like they were in a murder basement in a Saw franchise sequel and somebody was going to get murdered.
Wait, what? It's got
Uh,
dark.
Yeah, it was. Things looked dire in Frisco and various other places where they were like, "Oh, and now we're gonna go to St. Louis." St. Louis looked like a brand new team with a lot of money, and let's go to Frisco. And Frisco, it looked like all of the actual front offices were unavailable, and they had to find a WeWork really fast. And they found one in a suspect area of town. When Burrell is making a deal for one of these players, he's not just gonna go, "Oh, maybe we actually want you." He shows up with binders and folders full of stuff of, look, this is the environment, this is where you're coming to play. He gets into the heads of his players and makes sure that they process it as, this is not just a paycheck, this is what the whole package is, this is what the landscape of you playing for this team actually looks like. This is a day in the life, not this is how many Lambos you're going to buy. That to me would have been the difference in this and the Chicago project, which is, okay, you could go to Chicago, enjoy the bag of money. I hope it keeps you warm in those Chicago winters.
And it won't. It will it will not.
Nope. Spoiler alert. It won't.
It's a very cold place. Yeah. And then with the binders and folders thing, that just harkened back. I don't remember when this was exactly. I think this might have been the first year. We had a opportunity to talk to Reyna about his kind of player recruitment. And I think it came out, we were wondering like how they would make the case to players. And he talked about a PowerPoint that they had where they presented, and that seemed like woefully inadequate. It seemed there's gotta be something else, but maybe no, it was just, here's this PowerPoint we threw together.
Yeah,
I hope you like it.
That tracks with all of the assumptions that different people make, myself included, where it's like, for what Claudio Reyna would say, all right, sit down, here's a PowerPoint. Bill here will walk you through it. Rodolfo Borrell goes, let's take a walk, puts his arm around the guy. They walk across the pitch and they talk about life. Borrell has a cigar in his front pocket. And at a certain point, when he feels like he's made the point, he pulls out the cigar and he cuts off the end and he lights it and he starts smoking it. He looks at the player and he goes, look, I'm just thinking about you and your future. And I want what's best for you. You make the decision, but this is the dream that I've painted for you. A very inspirational sports movie. I feel like it is that versus, we have a PowerPoint. And if you don't have PowerPoint, we have the PDF version and we can just email that to you if you want.
It's a big attachment though. So,
it's a big attachment. That's a great way to summarize Claudio Reyna as a human being. It's a big attachment. It's a big attachment. I hope you have Dropbox Plus.
Yeah, and then Tamari's question. Oh wow, I love mailbag day.
Me too.
Tamari's question. I do think indeed that this was the maybe one other that Roto had referenced when Desler seemed like he was a sure thing and turned out to be. Yeah, I do think, which is good because now it's 2 for 2 in terms of what he was trying to get across in terms of big players, but bad in terms of we don't know what's around the corner now.
Yeah,
we don't have any inkling at all as to who might be coming.
You don't think that maybe one other was Miguel Borja? How serious do you think that one was?
I think this was post Borja that we talked about this, wasn't it? I think
the maybe one other was when Borja was still technically in the running, but the sourcing on that was not as firm as Desler was. Like Desler was, everybody is assuming this is a done deal, and Borja was there's it's like in Star Wars. Always there are two, a master and an apprentice. There's always a prominent one that has what looks like good sourcing, and then there's always one that just crashes in the side door that's like, by the way, this one's also happening. And that people go, that's what people are hearing, but it doesn't have the same kind of certainty as this other one. So there was that guy from Eastern Europe whose name I've already forgotten. That
Stefanescu.
Yeah, Stefanescu. That was the Stefanescu guy. It's totally happening. Says some guy out of Eastern Europe. No Tommy Scoops, no Fabian Rankel, none of the usual suspects. It would be interesting if the Bukari deal went back that far. I guess we won't know until however many new moons pass before we talk to Roto again. And we can just ask
Mhm.
him, was he the maybe another that you mentioned all the way back when we were also prodding you about Desler?
Right. Yeah, I delved into the Borja stuff enough to look at here's how he'd be as a player, but just given his profile, given the money, given the number of teams that he'd been through, I never really thought that that was a serious Borrell target. It seemed like that was going to be more in that kind of panic buy scenario. So I don't know how necessarily that got as far along as it did
Yeah,
in terms of
Claudio
the
Reyna
rumor
would have
mill
signed him to 26 million a year with 3 options triggered by 3 appearances as a starter.
being upright.
Being
So
upright, yes, versus
oh,
horizontal.
Miguel, you are standing. Keep doing that for another 2 weeks and we'll reward you next year.
Another Bukari question that we have that I'll tag in here as we loop back to the initial one. So David
Yep.
Sosa also asks, don't get me wrong, Bukari looks like a serious talent. I'm excited to see what he does, and Desler looks strong and a useful addition at a spot where we need it. That said, why do so many other teams seem to be doing better? Even leaving Giroud
Mhm.
aside, still bums me up. Bums me up. That's a new one for
Burns
me.
me up. Burns me up.
Burns me up. Oh, bums me. Okay,
Kerning.
see, Kerning. Kern, you dig it? And now Lozano and Reus. What about this deal with Tim Ream? Nothing against Vicen or Heinz Ike, who's quite good, mind you. Ream would be a huge step up, immediately a top 5 MLS center back, I think.
And as you can probably tell, that was texted directly to me. That was one of the routes that went in. Yeah, so I think we have to take this with, again, back to that original question about ownership's willingness to spend to keep Austin FC in the top tier of the league in terms of investment. Yeah, I think they're going to do that. And I think given the valuation of the team, given the deals that they're able to make, yeah, I don't think spending on players is really the issue. Like, they're definitely willing to do it. They probably paid some players more than they really probably should have with some of the contracts, but obviously I assume Uncle Tony needs to okay those numbers before they actually offer those contracts. So I would imagine in terms of that and just in terms of the spending relative to the rest of the league, yeah, I think Austin is willing to spend. It's just a matter of, okay, are we getting the right mix of players? Are we spending wisely? And then also the kind of idea of, do we actually, since it is a salary cap league, is there that room in the salary with the roster spots, the international spots, how much that base and guaranteed salary are? Just, is there the money to do that? Can that be done and make the math work on the contract? So I don't ever think it's really going to be a matter of, oh, we don't want to pay player X this amount, but I think it's more, okay, does this work with what we have? Which I think is why, for example, you saw Biru, you saw Heinz. There might have been flashier options at those positions, but the idea of, okay, we have this much to spend given where the budget is right now. These are good players that can contribute at this level. We can get them in for 200,000 or less, and we should do that. But I think if, again, with Marco Reus, that was a little complicated because there were weird discovery rights with that. So it apparently
Weird
now the
discovery
Galaxy.
rights in this league? No.
Oh, I know. Yeah. So apparently the Galaxy's interested in him. I think that's still going on. But Charlotte discovered him. Charlotte was the sole MLS team that had
Charlotte
Bundesliga
discovered him.
access.
San Diego dreamed of him first. And he was but an inspiration in the wind when the Chicago Fire first played, but they felt the omen of his coming, and then he was here. It's prophetic Old Testament kind of stuff with these things.
It says in Deuteronomy here that, yeah, that
And that's the
Lozano
thing is
definitely.
you got to be a real sicko. You dig all the way into Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy's not good for anything, for the most part. But you really dig in there and you get some of that good lore that's hidden back there about where these players come from and the whys and wherefores of how they end up where they end up. The
And the
thing
Lord said, "Hey, Syria."
and Roto said there shan't be panic signings, and yea, verily, there were not panic signings. You mentioned panic signings. I did want to bring this up. There will never be an end to the rumors and speculation and interpretation of this thing or that thing, or this face or that gesture that our Spaniard sporting director friend makes while sitting in the Lexus Club. But I feel like one of the things that has borne out is that this guy really does. He was really serious. He does not do panic signings. He is not going to pull the Miguel Borja lever unless that's the lever he really needs to pull. And he knows what his resources look like. He re-emphasized it over and over, even as recently as the most recent press conference he gave us. But he knows what his scouting and recruitment department have in terms of resources, and he knows what those incredibly annoying surprises were that lay in all those contracts for him. I feel like for once, people following the club can actually have a pretty reliable feeling that this guy knows what the lay of the land is, even though he's only going to just drip, drip, drip little bits of that out to us as we find it out. But yeah, there are limits, and he knows what those limits are. An extension on David's texted to you questions, hopefully that Kerning doesn't defeat. Related to this, Alex Ring's in one of the 3 DP positions. So do you think he's a candidate for a buy down or a trade?
I do, yeah. Oh, I did want to circle back to one thing before
Sure.
we handle that question. Actually, a kind of piece of David's, but then also you had talked about the surprises in the contracts as if they are all past tense, which I do not think they are. I think that there are still surprises to navigate. Again, yeah, I was talking with Zach Graham about this last time. The kind of idea that, yeah, maybe with these new rules now, maybe with second buyout, maybe with if GTA is rehomed, that there are some other summer transfer moves that are available, but also maybe have the feeling that unless that buyout doesn't get used, assuming that rule is correct and that there is a second buyout and Austin's willing to do stuff with it, that kind of translates back to the Ring question here. Again, I think it just depends on, can you really bring in another DP in the summer and pay that person and have the spots on the roster you need. I think that some of those components are there, but again, I think that goes back to the whole kind of panic buy statement, right? The kind of idea that the team doesn't do panic buys. And if it makes more sense just project wise to bring that player in the off season, then maybe that's what happens. And you just roll with Bukari and Desler and the players that are here and see, first of all, can you make the playoffs? I think they will, given that.
Yeah.
And then how far they go in the playoffs, which is decently far until they run into RSL. And then I think there's going to be issues there.
And nothing matters until September being the watchword of things. Who knows what RSL's injuries look like between now and September?
Yeah, not to doom them or anything, but yes, but if Arango blows out a knee, then their prospects look a lot bleaker.
Yeah, and the reason I brought in the Ring question was just this general trying to figure out what if under a particular phase of the moon, Alex Ring scores 3 goals in 6 games or something, is his contract immediately extended and he's given a giant raise? There's so many of those kinds of things that, as much as people think that you know what, Phil, here's what we've been screwing up. We have not been going into these press conferences, shouting at Wolf, telling him that he's horrible and terrible and should be ashamed of himself. B, we are not demanding to look at the full contracts of every single player on the squad. And C, we are not properly advocating for ourselves as deputy armchair sporting directors of the club. So we need to work on those things so that we can give all of the most certain answers. Because I joke, but like the big question marks that we have were written all over Borrell's face in that press conference of, I cannot wait to, and I'm also terrified to find out what those other bizarre roster things are that he's contending with. But
and he knows them all at this point.
He knows all of it at this point.
Right? At this point that he's been through every contract, fine tooth comb, trying to figure out, okay, what did Claudio do? And what do I need to do to make this right?
It's like he's got a bottle of bourbon sitting there with 2025 written on it that he gets to open when certain things expire and he doesn't have to deal with them anymore or something. That's so just generally David extends over to asking about seeing what evidence have we seen of his network and expertise in his signings so far, including the 2 most recent ones. What's your vibe on what we can expect? He says that he wants to improve every position. He has said everyone is for sale at the right price in the right circumstances. How would you assess Project Roto at this point?
Yeah, the one thing that I'm really curious to see, and the whiskey thing, that's hilarious. I'm imagining a bottle of Tempranillo in his wine cellar that's aging, that has just a sticker on it that says, "The roster is now fixed."
The roster is now mine. I am now master of this domain at
Fixed,
long last.
AKA mine. Yeah, the one thing that I'm curious to see is, again, obviously, long time connections with City Football Group, having been Man City's assistant coach. Obviously, they may or may not have run afoul of some financial fair play things. And so I'm curious as to what happens with that system, what happens with some of those players. Girona, which CFG took over, and that's been like one of the La Liga powerhouses now, like not obviously to the same level as a team I hate for Madrid and team I like for Madrid and Barcelona, but just thinking about where they are, Champions League football and all that. I'm just curious to see what players within that system are potentially gettable. And obviously, NYCFC is a CFG team as well. So they generally will probably get first pick of those players. But one thing that I do want to see is, okay, is he going to be able to mine that at all? Is he going to be able to get some of that talent there? Those players that have been obviously working towards those kind of highest levels of European soccer, and are some of them going to be able to go to MLS finishing school for a few years? That's something that I'd like to see. That's something that I'm really curious about. But I don't know what the possibilities of that are there, or if it's going to be something where you see with Bukari, with Desler, you have these players that are playing in France, playing in Serbia, not quite on that high tier and not quite connected with big powerhouse clubs per se, but certainly testing themselves at good levels and then being able to come over here in their primes and do well. But in terms of, let's say there's a U22 player that will come here for a couple of years and then kill it for Man City when he's 24 or 25. I'd really like to see one of those players possibly come in and get some run.
I've got a kind of a pocket theory about Borrell where you look at these two big signings and
Mhm.
unlike Claudio, it doesn't have any City Football Group DNA on it. He was at City Football Group with Man City. He worked under Claudio at NYCFC. I feel like his moves are dictated more by what he has seen, bodies he has seen buried, that kind of thing,
Mhm.
more than directly playing off of that relationship. And I think there are lessons that he has learned working under Pep, working under Claudio at NYCFC. And I feel like, as much as he joked in the first few press conferences that we're all roster experts and we all know more about this than him and everything, I think he's the sickest of the sickos who finally has the reins. Part of the reason that he came here was to have full control of the ship and be able to think back to moves he would see Claudio make, that he would see other sporting directors make at clubs that he was at, and having the opportunity and having the backing of ownership to make decisions that need to be made within certain boundaries, of course. Being able to make those decisions himself, I think there's some really canny strategic thinking going on that is unfettered by City Football Group has this deal with this guy that we've been training up. Borrell is getting to build all of that from the ground, raise some of it, and then rebuild some of it from the ground. But I think that, like, for me, that's been the interesting thing to see over the last year. And it'll be even more interesting to see how it goes going into the future, seeing what the plans
Mhm.
are for the next pro team. That roster is short. I talked to Brett Utley after the game this past weekend and asked him if we could expect to see something. And he said that he's eager to see possibly some more signings coming in, not just bringing guys in from the U17 academy team, but
Mhm.
it seems like there's interest there. And he got that third division team to a championship last year. So maybe filling the pipeline for the first team with promising options that don't have the kinds of price tags of the Bukaris and the Deslers. It'll be interesting to see how that part of Burrell's strategy starts to fill in, because we haven't really seen much of that yet.
Mhm.
He didn't go overboard trying to hang on to Cristo Vela. He let go of various very promising players who were very good and who were doing well on Las Vegas Lights, for example. There were judicious decisions made for who knows how many different reasons, but that's where I'm most interested to see the next set of moves beyond whatever big flashy first team signings happen, sure. But I think that's something that will be the sleeping giant of the overall project, because there's no way that he's going to leave that pipeline dry.
Yeah, because that's the thing. 'Cause the Academy is, and I'm working on a thing right now about Matt Doyle's midseason assessment of Austin FC and weighing in on some of that. But he talks about there not really being a youth movement at Austin FC right now. And part of that is the Academy's 5 years old, right? So you really haven't had the time to generate the pipeline of talent that you would expect. There's obviously a few players. I mean, you have Damian Loss, you have Valentin Noel, who have come through Next Pro, and obviously they seem destined for some good things. I'm sure that if there was a green card that Valentin Noel had, we would be seeing him around instead of seeing him in Las Vegas. But I do think that U22 and just thinking about those spots, that is risky, and that is something that Austin hasn't so far really made good use of. And we still have to see what's happening with Musa Jite's contract, because obviously they either have to find a new home for him in just 20 days or he's back here, which would be an unusual situation. But just thinking about what they might do with some of those other positions, right? Kolmanich is still a U22 technically, but he's not going to be next year, assuming that, of course, he is under contract. So we'll have to see what happens there. But there are those positions to potentially use. And I'm curious to see, okay, does he have players in mind for those spots? And is that something that's going to require, more international spots? And is there going to have to be a little wheeling and dealing in order to be able to get that stuff done? Yeah, so those are fascinating questions. And yeah, you were talking about Next Pro, and obviously, like with Rigoni here, they've also had an attacker who has unexpectedly departed the club. And I think you can point to their woes, like the first team's woes having to do with maybe being down kind of one player that they expected to be a key player.
So, Phil, to wrap things up, we're going to get into the feelings.
Are we at that time?
So I think it's time to dig deep. Alex asks,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
how do you handle the emotional roller coaster that this team puts us through? The dizzying highs, the depressing lows, getting whiplash, and need advice.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I answered quite a bit of this in the mailbag article, which came out a few days ago. And I'd forgotten to actually link to the first time meme, but I think the one that I'm talking about, the Western, the guy with the noose around his neck,
Yeah.
I think part of it's like that, right? So once you've been around soccer enough and you've experienced heartbreak, then you realize part of the experience. And obviously, when we're talking about MLS, playoffs should be your baseline expectation. If your team does not make the playoffs in MLS, yes, you should be disappointed. You should have definite questions. You should feel some angst come decision day, or even before that, if you're out before decision day actually happens. But again, yeah, this kind of idea of just keeping big picture in mind, I think, is important. Just again, bad losses are bad, good wins are good. You should definitely feel those in a very kind of finite dose. Try to get over those things one way or the other within 24 hours. And then obviously think big picture, think about where the team is. Again, if you see individual players that are making gains, those kinds of things are good. And then I had mentioned, until we actually get an MLS Cup, the real MLS Cup, of the friends that I made along the way. So this idea that the relationships, what you have in terms of your watching experience, the fun, going with friends, going with family, meeting people, all those sorts of things. Really, there's a community that is here that's pretty wonderful, and finding kind of your niche within that community, be it in a big supporters group or be it just the folks that you go to games with. I think it's important to think about those sorts of things and how the team can be something that can then fan out into kind of other aspects of your life.
Yeah, there's days when you bring the sweating handkerchief and the crying handkerchief, sometimes just the sweating handkerchief to a game. Sometimes you ask your butler to load the comfy blanket into the carriage.
This makes assumptions.
Yeah, I'm just saying, everyone, when we depart for a game, we consider, what state will the fine country estate be in when we return home. I've been watching too much Bridgerton recently.
Clearly.
Yeah, there's vibes, there's feelings, there are very strong feelings in various corners about a lot of different things. It's the podcast is called Emergency Podcast, and the emotional roller coaster is an aspect of that. Seeing one thing or another crop up one week to the next They're the things that stay the same over a course of weeks, and things that seem to be a big, crazy deal for 7 days at most, and they just dissipate. I think a lot of this is just getting used to having this muscle memory for not just a team that you follow, because a lot of us have followed a lot of teams, but getting used to having a home club that you don't have the comfortable distance from North London that some of us do for some clubs, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Someone had complimented me on my answer in the mailbag to this question and said, yes, I definitely want a megaphone for this. And also I can tell that an Arsenal fan wrote this.
yeah, they know how to peg us, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah,
Well, it's entirely true.
yeah. There's always some new thing that's going to crop up, and over the last 24 hours or so, it seemed, or 48 hours or so, it seems that the biggest emergency is that Dallas fired their coach, and everything else is just fine. But yeah, I don't know. It's a constantly evolving process, and I think that's part of what we're documenting here.
Yeah, part of the Title Emergency podcast is a joke, right? So the kind of idea that these emergencies that you are feeling are not necessarily actually emergencies in real life. And in terms of putting that in perspective, something that feels injurious in sports is not compared to, say, the outcome of a really bad election in 5 months, which is one of the possible choose your own adventure pages that we're all going to experience. But I do think that, yeah, there is a certain kind of feeling of, oh, wow, what happens next, be it good, be it bad, that does have this kind of heightened sense when you are a fan of that kind of emotion around it. And yeah, there can be a feeling of whiplash, right? So, oh, we got this really good player. Oh, but he's not playing for Ghana. What's going on? What's this all about? And then it's, oh, we have possibly 15 players to dress for games in our next month. It's, oh, but then we're going to be a much better team once this pesky summer transfer window opens up on July 18th. But yeah, so there is a lot of buffeting about that happens, I think, when you follow sport, especially soccer, where there is so much of it. There are so many games, and those games, unlike a lot of other sports, can turn on a single moment, right? You had the Austin-Houston match at Shell Energy Stadium on April 20th. Looked like it was going to be like a really terrible 0-0 draw. You were going to leave feeling bad. And then in the moment, you have Stuver kick a ball to Fodry, kick a ball to Rigoni. He scores. And then all of a sudden, you have this win over a hated rival where it didn't look like that was going to materialize before. And then you flash back to last summer, the aforementioned Dallas, and obviously, it looks like, okay, we're going to get a draw. We're going to win the Copa Tejas without the assistance of Dallas Houston draw at the end of the season. And then lo and behold, Tafari scores a winning goal and everybody feels pretty wretched. So it happens. You get emotionally invested. You get to love the team. You get to love the players. And with that comes a certain level of heartbreak and turmoil, and that's just your lot in life, and that's part of it when you become a fan. But there are also those good moments. The key really is to just try to maintain perspective and not let one individual bad thing get you down. Yeah, the Western Conference Finals in 22 against LAFC, that felt bad. So you're 90 minutes from MLS Cup. It's been this magical season, and then to lose in the way you did, and the way that, again, LAFC played versus the way Austin played, it was just a pretty wretched feeling coming out of that game. But then obviously recognition for the season, perspective of, hey, that was year 2, and we did this and we're on the up and up, and then 23 happens. And then this year. But it is a journey, and again, I hope that you were all having fun on it, and I hope that you were not too despondent about even a 5-1 loss, because again, it is just, in the grand scheme of things, one loss that probably will not really even matter much since it happened in early June. I am rambling officially. Moises, do you have anything to add to this?
I think that's pretty much it. We got a late arriving mailbag question via the Los Verdes Slack from Elise Barmettler
Oh,
asking,
really?
how much damage has the Berhalter coaching tree done to American soccer? Phil, I think that's a whole podcast of its own. I don't know how Elise thinks that we can answer that in one show.
Oak wilt.
Is it oak wilt? We got to track exactly what damage it's doing and where. And yeah, if we could solve that, Phil, I feel like somebody would be paying us a very large amount of money to have diagnosed that.
Could you imagine though, like calling an arborist over and it's, yeah, it's about my Berhalter coaching tree. We want to win the World Cup in 26, and
I mean,
we just
I know
we just lost this game to Colombia. Could you take a look, maybe? And
I know you
take
guys
some
have
saves going on?
arborists, but do you have arborists who specialize in Berhalterwelt? Yeah,
Nico Estevez is available.
there you go.
He has U.S. national team experience, so
That is one of the requirements in theory.
yes. You should have a familiarity with the team that you are trying to coach, unless you are coming from somewhere fabled, right? You can swoop in. Wasn't there crazy talk about like Zinedine Zidane becoming the U.S. national team
Yeah,
coach for
and
a
then
while?
he headbutted those bits of speculation into the stratosphere.
Oh man, too soon. Right?
Will it ever not be too soon? Or
It will never be too soon.
is there such a thing as that?
Speaking of the whiplash, speaking of the pain of being a fan. All right, I guess that brings us to the end, and we are fresh out of mailbag questions for now, but appreciate everybody for bringing those to us. And next, obviously, the emergency will have to do with going to Colorado and seeing what might happen there. We've seen wonderful things happen. We've seen terrible things happen as recently as last year. Prairie dogs there have contracted diseases, making the area around the stadium inhabitable. That is a historical note. If you Google that, you'll be able to find that tale. Moises, what will you be doing to prepare for the Rapids match?
I'm gonna carb up. I'm gonna work on my cardio. I'm gonna put in some extra cycles on the bike because who knows what's gonna happen at elevation this weekend. I
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know. Mentality wise, it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back after the RSL game. The second team, I think, had their wits about them relatively well this past weekend, even though that game didn't go the way that they wanted it to. They did better than I think people thought they would coming off of the similarly proportionally bad loss against Real Monarchs. So it would be nice to see the first team follow the second team pattern wise for once rather than the second
Mhm.
team take a page from the first team. So yeah, that's
Mhm.
I'm girding my loins for anything.
Yeah, the match that you were talking about, the Austin FC 2 match against Rapids 2. Nate Jones, Austin FC legend Nate Jones was part of that match. Before we go, any kind of thoughts on him? And did Austin maybe fail in not taking him and taking 250,000 in GAM instead?
And not knowing about all of the contract surprises and how the GAM math
Mm,
worked out and everything,
true.
it could be that was just too good of a deal not to take. And
Hmm.
if the Rapids organization continues being the Rapids organization the way that they have been for a while, I don't
Hmm.
think it's outside the realm of possibility that he doesn't become available as a pickup if he's mostly languishing with Rapids too, and they don't actually call him up to their first team. He may end up swinging over this way regardless. He put in a great
Hmm.
shift. He looked real good out there and was a real solid backline wall for Rapids
Hmm.
too. I think that Austin could certainly do worse than end up reacquiring him and there being
Hmm.
a kind of bizarre circuitous nature to his career trajectory in MLS. Only time will tell there.
Right. So basically you think, yeah, I figured the same thing. This gamma spackle and we need it.
Uh-huh.
So one more time, thank you for all the questions. And you'll see us like either Friday or Saturday at our quote unquote normal time, and then in the weeks to follow. But doing this one now at this time was just too good to pass up.
Where's Phil? He usually starts this off.
He's teaching in San Antonio today. Colby, go ahead and start us off.